Welcome everyone as we learn Torah Hashem Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach, and as always we begin with appreciation to TorahAnytime.com for giving us a global platform, and we thank Kol HaLashon for their global network and our other carriers, Torah Communications Network, and we thank YouTube and Facebook and our subscribers, our wonderful Zoomers, and those that join us here in our flagship station at Agudas Shul of Fairways, Lakewood. We have a very special dedication tonight. It's dedicated by my longtime Talmud, Rabbi and Mrs. Yoel Klugman, and they are a major sponsor of the Mishnah Yomis as well. They are sponsoring it with appreciation to Hashem for the many simchas that their family was blessed with, and they want to thank Hashem, and they want to wish that there should be such simchas for all of Klal Yisroel. Again, I want to remind you that if you want to sponsor a shiur, if you listen to these shiurim, enjoy them, and want to be mechazik them, then you could sponsor a shiur 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. One of the next things that is a sponsorable dedication is we're about to finish Mishnah Yomis site. You could sponsor the whole Masechtas Gittin every night during the entire months that we learn Masechtas Gittin. 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. The subject that we're going to start off with tonight is a something very unusual in the census of Klal Yisrael. It says Kol Pekudei HaLeviim, the number of the Leviim, mi ben chodesh v'mala, from a month old, was Shnayim ve'esrim Aleph, was 22,000. Now you have to understand that the rest of Klal Yisrael was counted from the age of 20, while the Leviim were counted from a month old. And yet their number, which should have been very large from infant on, their number was dramatically less than the smallest of the Shvatim. The next smallest Shvatim from 20 was Binyamin, that was 35,400. And some of the Shvatim numbered in the 50,000s and 60,000. And here, Shevet Levi, that wasn't counted from 20, they were counted from infant, from 30 days old, they only numbered to 22,000. And this question has become famous from the Ramban, the Heilige Ramban, the Heilige Ramban asks, how could it be that the Shevet, which is known as Avodah v'Chasidav, Bruchei Hashem, Hashem's dedicated servants and pious ones, those that are blessed of Hashem, were such a low number? So it's interesting, before I get to the Ramban's famous teretz, the great Abarbanel, my family tree, the Weiss family tree, it's interesting, we are Ashkenazim, but we trace our family tree back to some Ashkenazim. There were some Ashkenazic Weisses that left in the 1600s Spain during the time of the Inquisition, together with the Abarbanel. So the Abarbanel says that since Klal Yisrael needed to fight with Yeshua to conquer the land, so therefore Hashem gave them a larger census. It's because they were needed in combat. But Shevet Levi, that didn't go and fight, and Yeah, Abarbanel adds, Shevet Levi didn't work the land, and therefore they needed to be supported by Klal Yisrael. Hashem didn't make them a large census. That's the Abarbanel. Now, this Abarbanel sheds light on something very important. What it sheds light on is that we should realize that how many people in each Shevet there was is not up to fate. It's not a matter of, mikra. It's not, coincidental. Everything has a cheshbon. Hashem causes who would be born, who wouldn't be born, and there's a calculation in everything. I say this because in discussion of the shidduch crisis, there are those that want to say, well, there's more girls than there is boys, so there's not enough boys for the girls. That's wrong. The Rebbeinu Shalom makes it that there should be an equal amount. The proof of the pudding is that every time a child is born, a baskol goes out and says, Bas Pliny le Pliny, the daughter of so-and-so to so-and-so. There's always a shidduch for everyone. Now, you'll say, but some people don't get married. Sadly, a lot of times people mess up. They mess up. Some people don't even try to date. There are people that mess up. There are people that make wrong decisions. Now, the Ramban, he gives probably what is the most famous answer to this question. The Ramban says that there was a remarkable population explosion by Klal Yisroel. It was an unheard of event. Here you have a family that came down to Egypt, B'shivim Nafesh, one family. We know exactly there were 70 people. And 210 years later, this family left with 600,000 men from the age of 20 to 60. And that's after they were, their majority was wiped out during the Plague of Darkness. During the Plague of Darkness, 4/5 of Klal Yisrael died. And yet, even though 4/5 of Klal Yisrael died, that means 4 out of every 5 people died, yet they left a family of 70, 210 years later, left with the Erev Rav, 3 million people. Now, how was this accomplished? This was accomplished by a stupendous miracle. The stupendous miracle is that every woman gave birth Shisha B'keres Echad. Every woman gave birth to sextuplets. And this was a blessing that the Rebbeinu Shalom said to them, Kasher ya'anu oisai, as they afflict you, kain yirbe v'chein yifroitz. So will you increase, and so will you multiply. So says the Ramban, in a major statement, that who got the blessing of increase? Only those that were afflicted. But Shevet Levi was not afflicted. We know that because Paro told Moshe and Aaron, L'chu l'sivlo seichem, go to your burdens, not to his burdens. Because Shevet Levi didn't work. By the way, we have Yosef HaTzadik to thank for that. Because Yosef HaTzadik, when there was no food in Egypt, right, except for Yosef's food, so we know that, he took money from all of Egypt, and finally all of Egypt ran out of their money and out of their animals, so they sold themselves to the crown. Rak admas hakohanim. Yosef did not take from the priests. He exempted the sect of the priests. So Paro continued Yosef's enactment even for Shevet Levi, that were our priests. So the priests didn't work. And since the priests didn't work, they didn't get the bracha of the population explosion. That's what the Ramban says. It only says, Kasher ya'anu oisai ken yerba v'chen yifritz. As you were afflicted, you will increase and multiply. Since Shevet Levi wasn't afflicted, they didn't increase. And the biggest proof is the Gadol Adar, Amram and Yocheved, is the Gadol Adar. They had 3 children, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. They didn't have 18. They should have had at least 18. Every time she was pregnant, she should have had 6. But that was Shevet Levi. Shevet Levi didn't have 6 tuplets. So therefore, Shevet Levi was markedly less in census because they didn't have the blessing of Kasher Ya'anu Oisai Ken Yerba V'Chen Yifritz. That's the Ramban's explanation. And it's, a very powerful explanation, except that the Heilige Orach Chaim HaKadosh asks a very strong question on the Ramban. And the question is that it says in the Medrash, and he quotes it from Vayikra Rabbah, Ayin Tes Aleph, Vayikra Rabbah. It says, Loi Meis Yaakov at Shegir Yisroel Leklal Misper Shishim Riboy. That Yaakov did not die until Klal Yisrael reached 600,000. Now that's a remarkable thing. Because of the 210 years, Yaakov was only in Mitzrayim 17 years. He spent the last 17 years of his life in Mitzrayim. That's the famous gematria, Vayechi Yaakov. Vayechi is the gematria 34, because his main years of joy were the 17 years that he had with Yosef before Yosef was sold, and the 17 years that he had down in Mitzrayim together with Yosef before he died. So he was in Mitzrayim all of 17 years. And that means the first 17 years, they went from a family of 70 to 600,000. That's a medrash. So says the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, you see that it doesn't have to do with affliction. Because while Yaakov was alive, they weren't afflicted. Not only while Yaakov was alive, it says that the affliction didn't start until the last of the Shvatim died. The last Shevet to die was Levi. So you see that they had remarkable population explosion all the way in the beginning. And there was no affliction yet. So then Shevet Levi should have also had that population explosion. So that's the question of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh is a very big question on the widely accepted explanation of the Ramban. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh gives his own explanation. Also a fascinating explanation. Remember that when they were throwing the babies into the Nile, and with the wicked, Paro was, most people just look at Paro as some kind of, interesting king. He was a mass murderer. And Paro decreed, every child that was born should be thrown into the water. So Amram, who was the Gadol Adar, told people to separate from their wives. Why should they continue to have children that get killed? So everybody got up and separated from their children. So the Orach Chaim HaKadosh learns that it was Shevet Levi that followed Amram's lead, not the rest of Klal Yisrael. Amram was a Levi, so Orach Chaim HaKadosh learns that it was Shevet Levi that separated, And therefore, that's why, because of all that time where they separated from their wives, that's why they, and he goes on to say that even when Amram took back his wife Yocheved, that was because of Ruach HaKodesh, but the other husbands still didn't take back their wives, and that's why they went without, that's why they had so little children, Shevet Levi, and that's why their census was so small. That's the explanation of the Orach Chaim HaKadosh. The Oitzer applies, quotes the Gemara in Saita Daf Yud Beis. The Gemara in Saita says that when Amram separated from Yocheved, so his daughter Miriam, who was 6 at the time, came to him with a nevuah and said, "Father, you're worse than Paro. Paro decreed only on the males, but you, by separating husband and wife, you're decreeing on the females too. Paro, we don't know if his decree will be successful. You, everybody listens to the Gadol Hador. Paro took away only Olam Hazeh. But you, by not letting the babies being born, you took away also Olam Haba." And the Gemara says over there that Amram took back his wife Yocheved, and it says Omdu Kulam v'Ichziru es Nishayseim. Everybody else also took back their wives. So it's a question of how does the Orach Chaim HaKadosh deal with this Gemara? The Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Suraitza Ploy, suggests that maybe the Orach Chaim HaKadosh learns that everybody took back their wives except for Shevet Levi. I also want to point out that there's a Tosfos that says that the only people that separated from their wives are people that already fulfilled Periya Verivya. They already had a boy and a girl. Because Moshe and Amram, they already had a boy and a girl. They already had Aaron and Miriam. But those people that didn't fulfill Periya Verivya didn't separate from their wives. And there's another proof to that, because there's a remarkable Targum Yonis Menaziel that when Amram separated from 129-year-old or 128-year-old Yocheved, she went ahead and married Eltzofan bar Parnach. And from Eltzofan bar Parnach, she had twins, Eldad and Medad, the famous, legendary Eldad and Medad. Then Amram took back Yocheved, and even though normally that would not be allowed according to Torah, because it's Ma'azeh Grushasai La'achash Nisas, he took back his divorce after she married somebody in the interim, but this was before Matan Torah, therefore it was allowed. Anyway, normally Amram wouldn't be able to be married to Yocheved because Yocheved was his aunt, but before Matan Torah it was allowed. So the Be'er Yosef gives another explanation. Really fascinating. It's amazing how these Gedolim figured this out. You know, we all know that the Makkahs were Midah Keneged Midah, measure for measure. The first Makkah of Dam, which we highly publicized on the night of the Seder, I told you that one Pesach, when I was a teenager, we were at the Seder, and we all had our silver kaises, and my father Zichron Livracha, Susi Yagan Aleinu, my father casually said, "You know, at home we use glass by the Seder." So I asked him, Daddy, I used to call him Daddy. Daddy, all my kids call me Tati, but in those days it was Daddy. So I said, Daddy, is it because you didn't have silver? They were poor. He said, no, we had a lot of Pesach silver. So I said, so then why didn't you use glass? I mean, by the Seder, you're supposed to be ostentatious. He came out of Egypt with the Chush Gadol. So I remember he said to me, look, you're the minig man. Find out. So I did research. And the first thing I found out was, everybody that learns brachas knows there's a wonderful sefer, Sifsei Chachamim on brachas. So the Sifsei Chachamim wrote a Haggadah. And in his Agudas, he says there's a minhag to use glass because since there's a sheet that you should drink roif kais, the majority of the cup. If you have a glass, you could see if it's majority of the cup. If it's not a glass, what do you have to have? Depth perception? If it's a glass, you could see if it's a majority of the cup. That's what he says. But then I found, that's a nice reason, but then I found that the Or Zarua is quoted all over by all the Poskim as one of the major sources from Minhagei Yisroel. The Or Zarua says that we use glass because of Pirsumei Nisa. You have to know that there's only two things that we have to even sell our shoes in order to fulfill. It's very hard, especially in those days, where they walked over cold stone. To sell your shoes is a big thing. There were two mitzvahs you had to sell your shoes for Hanukkah, Menorah, for Neiros Hanukkah, and for Arba Kaisis. Because it's Pirsumei Nisa to broadcast the miracle. So the Or Zarua says that when you have the red wine, because we're supposed to use red wine, l'chatchila, al teira yayin ki yisadeh, the red wine in glasses all over the table, it broadcasts the miracle of the blood. Now the miracle of blood refers to three things. It refers to the makkah of dam, the plague of blood. It refers to the blood of the milah, that we circumcised ourselves. And that's a big thing. We circumcised ourselves, all of Klal Yisrael, at all ages. And we don't hear that anybody died from the circumcision. You ask Dr. Black how many people would die with widespread circumcision without training a slave population. Nobody died. And the fact that we courageously sacrificed the Korban Pesach, the idol, the sheep god of Egypt. Those three bloods, which we would put the blood on the lintel, right? And Hashem would pass over our houses. So, why did Hashem make the plague of blood? So, of course, the simple reason is they threw our babies into the Nile and it was full of Jewish blood. So therefore the Nile, Mida Kneged Mida, changed into blood. Also, it says that Hashem, when he does battle against their God first. And since the God of Egypt was the Nile, so therefore Hashem struck the Nile. It became bloody. Like he killed it. But it's also brought down in the Medrash another Mida Kneged Mida. What's the third Mida Kneged Mida? Remember, the Paro was interested in stemming at all costs the population explosion. Right? He said, Hava nischak malai. We have to deal wisely. Pen yirbe, lest they become too many. When there's a war, they'll join the enemy and they'll drive us out of the land. So he came up with a great idea. He knew that a Jew is not allowed to sleep with his wife when she's in Nida. So he said, we'll stop them from going to the mikveh. They won't be able to have children. So it says in the Medrash, that power decreed that the women couldn't go to be tovel. So the Medrash says he stopped us from being toivel for our tumas dam, and therefore the water is turned into blood. Says the Be'er Yosef, magnificent. Says the Be'er Yosef, listen to what the Be'er Yosef says. Says the Be'er Yosef, the Gemara tells us in Masechtas Nida, this is Masechtas Nida, Daf Tes Vav, that Pachad is Misalek es Hadamim, that fear removes blood. The women of Klal Yisrael that had to work Avodas Perach, the crushing, back-breaking labor. And remember that we said that the nefarious, diabolical way of the Egyptians is they gave the men the women's work and the women the men's work. So that means the bricks and the mortar was done by the women. The fear of the lashes of the Egyptian taskmasters caused them not to bleed. They didn't have to go to the mikveh. They could have children. Shevet Levi, on the other hand, they didn't work. So they bled. And they couldn't go to the mikveh. They couldn't go to the mikveh, they didn't have children. And that's why the census was small. And by the way, that gives us another idea of the kedusha of Shevet Levi. Not easy for grown men in the full bloom of their youth to abstain from their wives. You know, I've pointed this out in the past. There's a 7-year difference between Rav David Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, Zchus Yagen Aleinu, and his brother, Yibadal L'chaim Tovim Reb Ruben. A 7-year difference. Why is there a 7-year difference? Because for 7 years there was no mikveh in Luban, in Russia. So 7 years, Ramosha, in the full bloom of his youth, had to separate from his wife. Until, as I heard from Ramosha figured out a way to make the public bathhouse a kosher mikveh. But for 7 years, that's the kedusha of Klal Yisrael. So that's the explanation of the Be'er Yosef. The Brisker Rav says that the reason is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was concerned about Mamayna Shel Yisroel. That Shevet Levi, who was not subjugated, they weren't given a stipend of food from the government. And they had no means of parnasa in Egypt. And therefore it was Klal Yisrael that had to support them. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, I think you have to go. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zecher Tzadik, not that I want to see you go, but Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, Zecher Tzadik, Kodesh Uvracha, Zchus Yagen Aleinu, Hashem Yinkum Damai, he was killed by the Nazis, Yemach Shemam V'Zichron, L'Deira in Olam, and our words are subsise of his holy lips are Doivavais Bekever. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says that the reason why Shevet Levi had the smallest census because that's the way of the world, that there's always more psilus than eichel. There's always more dross than food. And there's more goyim than yidden. And therefore, the holiest shevet of Klal Yisrael was the least. That's the way the Rebbeinu Shalom makes it. Now we're going to move on to another very important subject. Mishpachas b'nei kahos. Mishpachas b'nei kahos Yachanu camped al Yerach HaMizbeach Teimona. They camped to the south. And Rashi says over here, in a very fundamental idea, that smuchen lebnei kahas, near the people of Kas, hayeshevet Ruvain, hachoinem Teman, who also dwelled on the south, says Rashi, Ay l'Rasha, ay l'shchenai, woe to a wicked person, woe to their neighbor. And therefore, lakach loku mehen dosim v'avirim, and therefore was smitten together with Kas, together with Kairach, dosin and avirim was sayim v'chamishim each, and the 250 people, im Kairach v'adasai, shenimshechu imam, because they got drawn in b'machlukoisam, with their fight. So this is the great lesson of Oila Rasha, Oila Shchenai. Woe the wicked person, woe his neighbor. This is the great lesson that the Rambam says, Odam nimshach achar sevivav, that a person is influenced by his neighbor, by his neighbors. In the first parak of Pirkei Avos, I don't know what's in the first parak of Pirkei Avos, this is such fundamental lessons for life. In the first parak, the 7th Mishnah, Nitai ha'arbeli omer. Nitai ha'arbeli says, Harchek mishachin ra, distance yourself from a bad neighbor, Ba'al tischaber l'rasha. Don't unite with a wicked person. Now the Rav, this is like two things. It seems to be the same lesson. It's a little strange. Stay away from a bad neighbor and don't unite with a Rasha. I mean, isn't that the same thing? Obviously, if you're supposed to stay away, you shouldn't unite. So the Rav says 2 points. Shaloi tilmoid mimasav, you shouldn't learn from his ways. V'oid shaloi tilka imai b'mefaltai, you shouldn't get caught up with his downfall. You shouldn't sink with his ship. You shouldn't be caught sliding in the abyss with his coattails. The Eila Rasha, Eila Shchena. I know a situation, very sad situation, of somebody that worked with people who did dishonest things. Now, he didn't do any dishonest things, but he worked there. And then there was a sting, and because he was in the office, they told him either you snitch or you go to jail. He went and asked the Shaila, and the psak was you can't be a moser, and he had to go to jail. To go to jail. Because you can't be amongst bad people. Because even if you don't learn from them, and God forbid you don't do anything like them, but when the fire comes, you're going to get caught in the flames. That's the Oila Rosh, that's the second reason. Right? It says, not just out the Schaba L'Rasha that you shouldn't learn from him, but B'harchek Mishachin Ra, stay away. Want to hear what Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says in Sefer Hasidim? It's really scary. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says in Siman Tafshin Ayin, Lo Yamoid v'lo Yeshev b'tfila eitzel Adam Rasha. Don't stand or sit in Shul next to a Rasha. Now, you don't talk with him, and you don't booze with him, You don't even learn with him. You don't learn from him. You can't take it. But says Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, when he stands and davens, he's thinking about sinful things. And the Shekhinah leaves the area. You're right next to him within his Dalet Amas. You're losing the Shekhinah. Now you have to know, we accept wicked people in the Shul. Tzibur means tzadikim beinanim rishon. We hope that the rishon will learn to become not rishon. We don't bar rishon. Right? The Shul is open because we're hoping to influence them. Just like in the Ketairis had to have the foul-smelling chelbana. That's what Tzibur stands for, tzadikim beinanim rishon. But that doesn't mean you have to sit next to him. In the Pirkei Avos, in the second parak, Mishnah Hey, it says, Hillel Omer, Al Tifreish min HaTzibur, don't separate from the Tzibur, Va'al Tamin Ba'atzmecha Ad Yom Meischa, and don't trust yourself until the day that you die. Don't leave the tzibur. Al tifreish min hatzibur. So there's a question, which Hillel this is? If it's a descendant of Yehuda Anasi, or it's Hillel HaZaken, the colleague of Shammai. So Tosfos Yom Tov says over here that this is Hillel HaZaken. And the Shiur Meshiv explains that when Hillel says over here, Al Tifreish min hatzibur, he's referring to something. Hillel used to have, as his colleague, before, we all know Hillel and Shammai, but it wasn't originally Hillel and Shammai. It was Hillel and Menachem. Menachem was the of Bezdin. What happened to Menachem? That became Hillel and Shammai. So the Shiur Meshiv tells us that the Gemara in Chagiga and Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph tells us Yotza Menachem uPiresh. Menachem left, he separated. Ubo Shammai Tachtov, and Shammai, the great Shammai, came in his place. So the Gemara says, where did Menachem go? I mean, you're in such a high position, where is he going? You know, it's like somebody goes, where are you going to go? You're the Yav Bezdin, where are you going? So the Gemara says, Heichen Yotze Menachem, Abai Amar L'tar B'Sra, he went off the derech. Chman Litzlan. Rav Amar Yotze L'Avodas HaMelech, he went in the service of royalty. And the Shiur Meshiv said they're not arguing. Shiur Meshiv says Rav is explaining how did he go off the derech. He went off the derech because he went into the service of Herdus. He was summoned by the crown. And he left and he was Pirish min hatzibur and he went off the derech. So that's what Hillel is addressing here. Al tifreish min hatzibur. And even though Menachem was great, he felt he was protected. Al tamein ba'atzmecha ad yom meischa. Don't leave the tzibur. You should know that, remember it says in Parshas Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim El Esav Achiv. Yaakov sent angels. Rashi said, famous Rashi says Malachim Mamish. Right? Malachim Mamish. Why? Because he says he wasn't sending any humans, because humans would get influenced by Esav. It wasn't safe to send humans. You got to be careful. They also say an amazing thing, in the Haggadah we say that the Rebbeinu Shalom, Ani v'loi malach, Ani v'loi soraf, I am not an angel, I am not a fire angel, Ani v'lo shliach. What's the whole thing that Hashem? Because Hashem didn't want to send anybody into Egypt. The influence of Egypt was so poisonous. It was a land of shtufei zima. It was a land of tumah. Hashem didn't want to send anybody in, even malachim. We have to know that one of the biggest things we have to be wary about our children is who are their peers, who influences them. I remember that 50, 60 years ago, they said that the biggest influences in a child's life were their religious institutions and the home. Now the biggest influences is the media and peers. So we have to know as Jews that we have to very carefully guard who are our children's friends and what they're exposed to. Really very important, because a person is influenced by their sviva. They're influenced by what's going on. It's true too. A woman has to know, she has to be very careful who she chooses as her friend. Ramila would tell a story. Ramila would tell a story of a woman that had a jogging partner. And every day they would jog. And this woman would tell her, the woman, she wasn't a poisonous woman, but she was poison. Every day when they were jogging, she says, it's a curious thing by me. I don't see you with your husband, Chaim. I don't see anything similar. You're so creative. You're so vivacious. And he's so drab and boring. I just don't see any similarity. I don't understand. And the woman said, he's a good husband, he's a good provider, he's a good father. But this woman every day would say, boy, didn't you ever think what it would be to marry to an exciting person? And her words took root, and it ended up in a divorce. This woman was a destroyer. But the woman that jogged with her, the wife, didn't learn the lesson of harchek mishachen ra. We have to be very wary who we're friends with. Person that has a poisonous tongue, hamaves v'chayim biyad haloshen, is a deadly friend. Every morning, we ask Hashem in our davening, v'archikeinu me'adam ra me'chaver ra. We say it twice. First we say Adam Ra, and then especially a Chaver Ra, because a Chaver that becomes one with us, that's Chiber, means a connection, could make a disaster. Big disaster. We say that the Chavetz Chaim made a Suda Seidah every year on the fact that he recognized that a person was not a good influence and he didn't become friends with him. Made a Suda Seidah about that. I have to know that a lot of times people make decisions because of economical reasons. This school is cheaper. This school is cheaper. I remember a family that lived across the street. They weren't really that religious. Their children, though, were going to yeshiva. And the family made the decision to take their children out and put them in public school. And I begged the family, I begged them. They didn't listen because public school was free. Shiva was expensive. Shiva was expensive. The children aren't from anymore. They're not religious anymore. I know somebody who grew up on the east side. His grandpa lived across the street from Bialystok. But his parents, they sent him to public school. So he married a guy. Now his children aren't Jewish. The environment is everything. People go away for the summer. And they're attracted by cheap prices. They're attracted by beautiful amenities, heated pools, tennis courts, good location. But you know, the most important thing is, who are your peers? Are they at least your level of Yiddishkeit, if not more? Because if they're less, a lot of times in bungalow colonies there's summer romances. And children end up marrying people a lot less than them because of your decision in the environment that you choose. This is Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma was asked to come and teach Torah. And he said for all the money in the world, he won't leave from a Makom Torah. Tell you an interesting story from the Chavetz Chaim. You see the wisdom of the Chavetz Chaim. I made a bracha already. An interesting story from the Chavetz Chaim. There was a boy who his friends, they were already going into business. And they were, already going in the market. It's exciting for a young man to be wheeling and dealing in the marketplace. His father, however, knew that the market was full of temptations, and he wanted his son to stay and learn. And the son said, "Hey, Dad, you're in the market. You're a Jew. You go to the market every day. So why am I different?" So the father told the son, we have the Gadol Adar not far away, the Chavetz Chaim. Do you agree that we should go to the Chavetz Chaim and ask him? So the son, who was confident, he wants to do like his friends. Everybody was doing it. His father is doing it. He said, yes, let's go to the Chavetz Chaim. So they get to the Heilige Gadol Adar, the Chavetz Chaim, Zech Tzavik Shevach Tzchus Yagen Aleinu. And the Chavetz Chaim engages him gently, and he says, there's a bird called the Bas Hayana, the ostrich. It says that the ostrich is an azar. It's a cruel bird. So Chavetz Chaim says, do you know why? He says the ostrich is very hot and is able to eat even glass. And the ostrich, thinking that his children are just like him, feeds the children glass, it cuts their throat, it cuts their esophagus, and they die. He says, we learn a big lesson from this. Your father has the maturity that he could survive the temptations of the market. You're young. You don't have the experiences of life. You can't survive all of the winds that are buffeted at you, that buffet you in the marketplace. go return to the Beis Medrash. And the child was a Meiker Rabbanan, and he listened. I'm going to tell you a similar story. It's interesting that we have the Zechiyah to mention Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman twice in one shir. He should be a Meltz Yoshev for us and all of Klal Yisrael. The great Gadol, who was in safety in America, but went back as the captain of a ship to Baranovich and went with them to the gas chambers. Rabbi Elchanan zegt, Tzavik Kodesh Brachas Chus Yagim Aleinu Hashem Yinkum Damai. Rabbi Elchanan was in America, and when he was in America raising money for Baranovich, people came and asked him shaylas. So a Yid came to him of German descent. He wanted to know, he wanted his son to go out and learn a trade. So he came. Now the Chavetz Chaim knew that was the German way, the way of Rav Hirsch, Toirim Derech Eretz. So he told the father, it's true, Torah is good, Yafet Toirim Derech Eretz, Sheyagia Shneim Mashkachas Ovan. However, this is challenging times. We have halacha. Mila is very important. Mila is shakol keneged kol mitzvahs. But if meisu achiv machmas mila, if a brother died because of mila, the blood doesn't clot, so then you don't mal the child. We look around us. In the Treifa Medina, and we see that children, many were meisu achiv machmas malacha, many of our brethren assimilated and got lost. Don't send him into that morass. The father didn't listen. And sadly, the story goes that what the Chavetz Chaim, what Rabbi Elchanan said, Meisu achiv machmas malacha, was kishkaga hayotzim l'fnei hashalat, and the boy that left died that year. We see today. Do you know that the protesters on the college campuses that are wearing keffiyas and unfurling Palestinian flags, do you know that many of them are Jewish children? Many of them are Jewish children. How could a Jewish child, when a siren goes off in Tel Aviv, 1 million people are woken up in the middle of the night to go into shelters. Missiles are rained down on Jewish people. They still have, we hear every day, other hostages found that they're dead. They still have our hostages. Our children are dying in the war every day. And we have Jewish people protesting for the Palestinians. So we see the koyach of how they're brainwashed, even to this extent. Many aren't brainwashed to this extent, but they're completely assimilated. So we have to know, we have to be very careful. I'm just speaking in broad strokes here. But we have to be very careful of our sviva. There's a Sefer Hasidim that says, it's a famous Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in Siman Pei, that if you're thinking about becoming friendly with someone and you want to do research, see who their friends are. Want to know if you should be friendly with a person? See who their friends are. He says, Ki ha'odam Oisa kasher re'eu. A person does like his friends. This is a famous Chazal. The Chazal says that they asked, I believe it was Rava, they asked Rava if the bird zarzir is a kosher bird. A zarzir is a starling. So they asked him if it's a kosher bird. So he didn't know, but he said, go up on the roof and see who the zarzir hangs out with. And they saw that the zarzir hangs out with the raven, with the oyrev, with the crow. So he said it's not a kosher bird. It's a very big lesson. This is very important with shidduchim. You're looking into a boy. See who the boy's friends are. You see, hanging around his inner circle are guys that go to the bar in the night. That's not a good shidduch. They go to the base of medrash in the night. What's the girl doing? Who are her friends? This is a very important parameter. This gave me a new insight into a question that I had. It's a question that always bothered me. One of life's greatest treasures is a good friend. One of life's greatest treasures is a good friend. You have a good friend, so then your good news is doubled and your bad news, Le'aleinu, is halved. A good friend is one of the greatest treasures of life. So how come the word for friend, re'echa, is the same shirish as ra, as bad, as evil? It's a very big question. I mean, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sent out his 5 Talmidim to find what's the best midah to cleave to, so Rabbi Yeshua said, Chaver Tov. How could it be that it's the same shirish as Ra? So the veteran listeners of my shiur know that I always answered this question by saying that you could tell who your true friend is in bad times. In bad times, the fair weather friends all disappear. This guy's radioactive, I'm staying away from him. A good friend sticks by you. So you can tell who your reyacha is in bad times. That's one pshat. That's a pshat that I always thought to say. It's also true that one of the biggest missions of a good friend is to save you from bad. A good friend will tell you, I don't think you should play around with the stock market. You don't know enough. It's just gambling. I don't think it's a good idea. Another person will say, I'll mind my own business. Now, a good friend will tell you, I don't think you're spending enough time with your wife. I'm just telling you because I'm a good friend. So the Ra is also, the good friend separates you from Ra. That's Knei L'cha Chaver. But now I see that there's another reason. Because from a friend there could come a lot of times Ra. We like to be with fun people. And sometimes fun people, they're fun, but they're not good friends. They're fun because they know all the gossip. So they tell you, you got to hear this. Yeah, that guy's a real loser. Let me tell you. They're poisoning you with Lashon Hara. The fun guy. Come, let's go. What do you mean, let's go? You should be learning. What do you mean, let's go? He's taking you away 3 nights a week, wasting your time, taking away from the shiur. Come on. You only live once. A lot of times from a friend comes Ra. therefore, I see it's already an hour. Wow, I can't believe time flew. Let me remind you again that if you want to sponsor a shiur, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi@aol.com. We want to remind you also that you should follow me on TorahAnytime.com and become a subscriber on YouTube. By the way, if you have YouTube, I put on a very exciting shiur, first of all from Bamidbar from 2014, and also there's a great shiur on Shavuos called Matan Torah. There's also a short shiur, especially for children, called The Sweetness of Torah. I just want to conclude that this is why we have to be very careful what our children are exposed to on the computer. Never, ever let a child alone with unsupervised internet. It's much worse than Stein V'Amayra. And in a few minutes, with adolescent curiosity, the child could receive major corruption. On the other hand, there are very good influences. A wonderful influence to expose your children to a good sviva is to expose them to read biographies. We have so many wonderful biographies. For the young children, art schools making biographies. And for us, there are hundreds of biographies. If you didn't read the biography of Rav Moshe, if you didn't read the biography of Rabbi Yaakov, if you didn't read the biography of the Manchester Rosh Hashiva, Rav Segel, go out. You don't know what you're missing. You're so fortunate. You have ways to expose yourself to unbelievable things. There's many more such biographies. I mean, you want to know about holiness and how Hashem does tzaddik goyzer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim. This is a different thing. This is not for learning and developing a moral compass, but also the biography of the Rimnitzer Rebbe. That just shows you how a human being could soar beyond anything that we could imagine. I want to thank you all for joining us and wish you a wonderful night and a wonderful Shabbos.